The German invasion of the Soviet Union began on the 22nd of June, 1941. From the outset, the attackers encountered a situation they had not faced in earlier campaigns in Poland, France, or the Low Countries: women fighting as enemy soldiers. The conflict on the Eastern Front was fundamentally ideological. On one side stood German National Socialism, on the other, Soviet communism, with each viewing the other as an existential enemy. This mutual hatred was far more intense than the fighting between German forces and British or French troops in Western Europe. Nazi propaganda had long portrayed the Soviet population as racially inferior, a narrative that fueled extreme brutality and widespread suffering as German forces advanced eastward. Beyond racial and political hostility, what particularly unsettled German troops was the presence of women in combat roles within the Red Army. This ran completely counter to the beliefs of the ruling ideology regarding what roles women were meant to occupy in society. Although Germany would eventually mobilize hundreds of thousands of women to support the war effort, this was done largely to free men for frontline service. With a handful of exceptions, these women served as nurses, clerks, drivers, searchlight operators, and in other positions far from direct combat. The front line itself was considered wholly unsuitable for women. The Soviet Union took a sharply different view. Men and women were regarded as fundamentally equal, at least equal enough to carry weapons and fight side by side in defense of their homeland. In addition to filling support roles similar to those seen in other armies, Soviet women also operated anti-aircraft guns and took part in direct combat. Some units staffed entirely by women were among the first to engage German armored forces as they advanced deep into Soviet territory. Women also served as fighter and bomber pilots, including one night bomber unit that earned a fearsome reputation among German troops. Most famously, large numbers of women served as snipers, many becoming highly effective marksmen with formidable records. Altogether, roughly 1 million Soviet women served during the war. Nearly 200,000 received military decorations, and dozens were awarded the state's highest honor for bravery and service. For the German military and society, the idea of women bearing arms was deeply offensive and seen as a sign of moral collapse. This mindset shaped the harsh and often brutal treatment faced by captured Soviet women soldiers. Large numbers were taken prisoner during the chaotic opening months of the campaign in 1941. German soldiers used a degrading slur to describe them, reducing them not to legitimate combatants, but to symbols of what they believed communism represented. Rather than being seen as soldiers in uniform, they were portrayed as evidence of societal decay and cast as embodiments of evil itself. As the front lines shifted rapidly during the first 2 years of fighting, many Red Army units found themselves isolated behind German lines. Hundreds of thousands of Soviet troops, mostly men but also women, continued resistance in these conditions. The occupying forces labeled such fighters as partisans and pursued them relentlessly. Women serving in Soviet units were singled out in particular, depicted as morally corrupt and dangerously cruel, and were frequently marked for execution rather than treatment as prisoners of war. This attitude did not originate solely with the Nazi leadership, but was widespread within the regular German army itself, which was deeply offended by the idea of women entering what it saw as an exclusively male military sphere. The only category of Soviet women generally spared by German forces were army nurses, who were more often treated as non-combatants, and therefore left alive. Just 7 days after the invasion began, on the 29th of June 1941, the commander of the German Fourth Army issued a blunt directive stating that women found in uniform were to be shot. Although this order was later officially withdrawn, it set a precedent, and many German officers at lower levels continued to issue similar unlawful commands regarding the handling of captured Soviet women soldiers. In October 1941, the commander of the German Sixth Army released explicit instructions concerning the treatment of captured partisans, women soldiers, and Soviet political officers. All were to be executed, with female soldiers to be killed immediately upon capture. Further down the chain of command, the commander of the 75th Infantry Division circulated a comparable order, declaring that women found wearing Soviet uniforms were to be shot as a matter of principle. Around the same time, the commander of the 4th Panzer Division wrote that partisans and female Red Army soldiers did not belong in prisoner camps, but should instead be executed on the spot. German units acted on these instructions from the earliest stages of the campaign. Female Soviet soldiers were routinely killed where they were captured, beginning in the first days of the invasion. The month after these directives were issued, one infantry division reported that it had executed 30 captured Soviet women soldiers. At the same time, male Soviet troops were often taken prisoner, except in cases involving partisans or political officers. Even so, captivity for male prisoners offered little chance of survival. Soviet prisoners of war were confined in makeshift open-air camps, where they were systematically starved, beaten, and humiliated. German soldiers often tormented them for amusement, tossing scraps of food to emaciated prisoners. These crimes were carried out not by special units, but by the regular German army. Of the 6 million Soviet soldiers captured during the war, around 3 million died while in German custody. Not all captured Soviet women were executed immediately. Many were subjected to brutal sexual violence before being killed. Others were taken alive and transferred to the SS, as the army had no facilities for female prisoners of war. These women were typically sent to large concentration camps designated for women. At one point, around 18,000 Soviet women prisoners were held in such camps. Faced with the prospect of capture, many Soviet women chose to take their own lives rather than fall into German hands. Thousands of others were shot. Their fate reflects the extreme ideological hatred and engendered violence that characterized the war in the East, where female soldiers were denied even the most basic recognition as combatants and treated instead as enemies to be erased.